The early morning sun had barely touched the horizon when the phone rang inside Spencer Towers, cutting through the usual hum of power and routine. Bill Spencer had been up before dawn, scanning financial reports with his usual precision, when the voice on the other end froze him mid-sentence. Katie Logan had collapsed. For a heartbeat, the man who prided himself on being unshakable felt his world tilt. The report slid from his hand. All the calculated balance sheets, the deals, the headlines, none of it mattered in the face of that single word echoing in his mind: collapse. By the time Bill reached the hospital, Katie lay motionless under a halo of monitors, her heartbeat struggling in mechanical rhythm. The scent of antiseptic and the low beeping of machines created a surreal quiet, one that made the walls seem too close and the air too thin. Her history with heart failure and the kidney transplant had always lingered like a ghost, a reminder that every moment of peace in her life came at a price. But lately, the pressures at Forrester Creations had been merciless. Endless boardroom conflicts, the rivalry between Ridge and Eric, Brooke's hovering influence. Katie had been stretched to her breaking point. And now, as Bill stood over her, his reflection visible in the polished glass of her room, fury replaced fear. He blamed Ridge Forrester. Not quietly, not internally, but with a cold, burning certainty. Ridge had a way of treating Katie like collateral, useful when calm, disposable when inconvenient. He had piled responsibilities on her while undermining her authority, convinced she would bend without breaking. But Ridge had never understood the fragility of the human heart, least of all hers. As doctors rushed to stabilize her, Bill's mind replayed the last few weeks. Katie defending herself in meetings, standing tall while Ridge dismissed her input about the PR crisis, Brooke stepping in to mediate, with her usual blend of condescension and charm. Katie had been holding everything together, her stress masked by professionalism, her exhaustion dismissed as overreaction. And now she was paying the price for their arrogance. Outside her room, Will paced like a shadow of his father, restless, pale, torn between guilt and helplessness. He had seen his mother push herself beyond reason, insisting she was fine, insisting she could handle it. When he saw his father arrive, rage written across his face, he braced for the inevitable explosion. Bill didn't disappoint. This, he growled to no one and everyone, is what happens when the Forresters feed on loyalty until it kills the people who actually care. Meanwhile, at Forrester Creations, news of Katie's hospitalization hit like a thunderclap. Brooke froze mid-sentence when Carter delivered the update. Her immediate instinct was guilt, then fear. She had spoken to Katie just the day before, pressing her to take time off, but she had also reminded her, almost offhandedly, that Ridge needed someone he could rely on. The implication had been clear. If Katie couldn't handle the heat, perhaps she wasn't the right person for the job. Now, those words haunted her. Ridge, however, reacted differently. He blamed the stress of her medical condition, not the company, assuring everyone that the workload hadn't been unreasonable. It was the kind of response that only enraged Bill further when he heard about it. By afternoon, Bill had summoned Justin and a team of Spencer executives to his office. The orders were brutal and precise. Pull every financial record connected to Forrester's recent ventures, find vulnerabilities, expose weaknesses. If Ridge had driven Katie to this point, then Ridge's empire would pay for it in kind. This isn't revenge, Bill told them, his voice low and lethal. It's justice. But deep inside, even he knew that wasn't entirely true. It was revenge. It was grief translated into strategy, love turned into war. Katie woke briefly that evening, her voice weak, but clear enough to whisper his name. When Bill took her hand, the strength in his grip startled her. "You need to stop," she murmured, reading the storm in his eyes. "Don't start another war because of me." But Bill couldn't promise that. He saw the bruises beneath her eyes, the four-line feeding life into her, and all he could think of was how fragile she looked, how small, how breakable, how wrong it was that the woman who had built his conscience was now paying for someone else's ego. As the days passed, the city buzzed with speculation. Reporters circled Spencer Publications and Forrester Creations like vultures, whispering about corporate betrayal and hidden feuds. Ridge issued public statements of concern, while privately seething that Bill was exploiting Katie's condition to weaken Forrester's image. Brooke found herself trapped between guilt and loyalty, torn by her love for Ridge and her devotion to her sister. She tried to visit Katie, but Bill refused to let her in at first, accusing her of standing by while Ridge drove Katie to collapse. It was only after Will intervened, pleading for peace, that Bill relented. When Brooke finally saw her sister, the sight of Katie asleep beneath sterile lights shattered her composure. For once, Brooke had no words. But Ridge had no intention of letting Bill turn tragedy into triumph. He met with Eric and Steffi to discuss preemptive legal strategies, knowing Bill would likely strike where it hurt most, Forrester's reputation. Yet, as Steffi pointed out, the real threat wasn't legal, it was emotional. Bill's never been more dangerous, she warned. He's not thinking like a businessman. He's thinking like a man who's lost control. And she was right. Bill began orchestrating a campaign designed to expose Forrester's internal instability. Leaks about mismanagement, whispers of health code violations in overseas factories, even questions about design copyrights, none directly traceable to him, but all carrying his fingerprints. Spencer Publications ran editorials praising loyalty and condemning corporate negligence, subtle jabs at Ridge's leadership. The effect was immediate. Forrester's stock wavered, their board grew nervous, and Ridge found himself on the defensive. Through it all, Katie slowly began to recover. But her recovery was complicated by guilt. Every headline, every whisper of a new feud, felt like her fault. "He's fighting for you," Brooke told her gently one afternoon. Katie's answer was a whisper. "No. He's fighting because of me. There's a difference." When she was strong enough to walk, she demanded to see Bill privately. The confrontation was quiet but devastating. She told him that she loved him, that she knew every act of vengeance came from a place of devotion, but that if he didn't stop, she would never forgive him. "Don't build me a monument made of ashes," she said. "I don't need you to destroy them for me. I need you to save yourself." For the first time in years, Bill faltered. He had always been the protector, the warrior. But now, looking at the woman who had nearly died, he saw the truth. His war wasn't saving her. It was consuming them both. Still, letting go of anger was never easy for Bill Spencer, especially when Ridge appeared at the hospital days later, offering what he called an olive branch. The gesture was hollow, an attempt to save face more than an apology. Bill's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. It took everything in him not to explode. Katie watched the silent exchange, feeling as though she were caught between two storms. Ridge mumbled something about stress and unpredictability, about how no one could have foreseen this. Bill's laughter, dark and bitter, filled the room. "You don't foresee anything, Ridge," he snapped. "You just walk through people until they break." When Ridge left, Katie turned away, tears in her eyes. She didn't defend Ridge, but she didn't condemn him either. "Bill," she said quietly, "sometimes mercy is the only kind of power that lasts." That night, Bill sat alone in the hospital's rooftop garden, staring at the city lights, trying to remember what mercy even looked like. As the weeks went on, the war between Spencer and Forrester played out in subtle, dangerous ways. Business alliances shifted. Old friends chose sides. Katie's recovery became a symbol of resilience, but it also deepened the divide. Forrester's employees whispered that she had become the accidental martyr of the family's dysfunction. Spencer loyalists treated her survival as a rallying cry. Through it all, Katie remained caught in the crossfire, her heart stronger, but her spirit heavy with the knowledge that peace came only when one side chose to stop fighting. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the monitors in her room blinked softly and the ocean breeze slipped through the window, she finally understood something about herself and about Bill. Love, she realized, wasn't about who fought hardest. It was about who learned to surrender when fighting only deepened the wounds. By the time she left the hospital, the feud had cooled but not ended. Bill promised to back away for now. Ridge avoided her gaze at every board meeting. Brooke hovered, torn between regret and relief. And Katie, her strength slowly returning, began to rebuild her life piece by fragile piece, aware that her body might always betray her again, but determined that her heart would not. She had been broken, healed, and broken again, but through it all, she had survived. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the scars and the exhaustion, she carried the hope that someday, the men who loved her and the empire she once served might finally learn the lesson she had paid for with her life's blood, that peace, not victory, was the only battle worth winning. On a gray Los Angeles morning, when the air above the city shimmered with that strange pre-storm stillness, the world of Forrester and Spencer once again teetered on the edge of collapse. December had come, but warmth was nowhere to be found. Inside the glass towers of Spencer Publications, Bill Spencer stood by his window, the skyline reflected in his eyes like a chessboard. Every move, every decision, was a calculation. The empire he had built, once invincible, now felt precariously fragile. The recent scandals at Forrester Creations, Luna Nozawa's tragic accident, and the ensuing media firestorm had created an opportunity, one that Bill knew he couldn't ignore. To him, chaos was currency. When others panicked, he conquered. But this time, the war wasn't just about business. It was about redemption, ego, and the thin, trembling thread that still connected him to Katie Logan, the woman who had seen both the best and worst in him. Katie, however, was tired of being seen as fragile. As the Luna crisis spiraled, Brooke Logan Forrester had stepped in, as she always did, under the guise of helping, but with that subtle tone of superiority that cut deeper than outright criticism. Brooke's suggestion that Katie should focus on her family was wrapped in concern, yet laced with condescension. Katie could feel it in every carefully chosen word, every well-meaning smile. She wasn't angry at her sister. Not entirely, but she was exhausted by the unspoken hierarchy that always placed Brooke as the savior and her as the one needing saving. Ridge's decision to sign over the PR management to an external firm without consulting her only made it worse. She had been handling crises long before Ridge's ego and Brooke's diplomacy had turned them into a duet of authority. When she heard the news, her pride flared, not out of vanity, but because she knew she could have fixed this herself, with integrity, without spectacle. Bill saw that fire in her and smiled to himself. He had always loved that side of Katie, the part that refused to be underestimated. When she came to him, voice steady but eyes trembling with suppressed frustration, he saw an opening, both for business and for something far more personal. "If Ridge doesn't value you," he told her with quiet confidence, "I do." His offer wasn't just a lifeline, it was a temptation. Join Spencer Publications. Leave behind the world that keeps diminishing you. Bring your brilliance home. To me. He even suggested that we'll take a position in his company, emphasizing that Spencer Enterprises should be a family legacy, not just his empire. Katie hesitated. The idea of returning to that world, the power, the control, the constant edge between ambition and destruction, frightened her. She had worked too hard to become her own person, not merely an extension of Bill's vision. But the sincerity in his tone, the vulnerability in his eyes, made her wonder if this time might be different. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, another storm was forming, one far more personal, far more devastating. Dylan sat alone on the cliffside balcony of her coastal home, the wind cutting through her hair like 1,000 unspoken apologies. For days she had tried to suppress the truth, to bury it under layers of denial and shock, but guilt has a way of seeping through even the strongest walls. The crash that killed Luna Nozawa wasn't just an accident of fate, it was her doing. Her hands had been on the wheel. Her panic, her reckless decision to drive that night after the argument, had cost a life. And though no one suspected her yet, the weight of the secret had begun to destroy her from the inside. Electra Forrester had found her trembling in the middle of the night, still wearing the jacket from that fatal evening, her voice cracking as she whispered Luna's name. That confession, half-spoken, half-choked, had left Electra shaken to her core. While Spencer, hearing the truth secondhand, could hardly process it. Dylan had been their friend, almost like family, a woman who had laughed with them, supported them during their darkest hours. To know that she had been the one behind the accident was a blow that rippled through everyone she touched. Yet, even in their shock, both Will and Electra understood something essential. Dylan didn't need condemnation. She needed courage. And so, when she said she wanted to confess to Finn and Steffi Forrester Finnegan, Luna's closest kin, they refused to let her face it alone. They packed a bag, drove to her home on the cliffs, and promised to stay until she was ready. That night was long and heavy with silence. The sound of the ocean below was relentless, mirroring Dylan's own turmoil. She replayed the night of the crash in her mind. The rain, the headlights, the sound of tires screeching on wet asphalt, the scream that still echoed in her nightmares. She had never meant to hurt anyone. She had been angry, reckless, human. But intention could not erase consequence. As dawn crept across the horizon, she realized that redemption could only begin with truth. At Forrester Creations, Finn had been trying to keep his composure. Losing Luna had broken something inside him. Though she had not been his by blood, she had been family by heart, a sister, a soul he had promised to protect. When Dylan's message came through that morning, asking to see him and Steffi, he sensed something final in her tone. Steffi, already weary from months of family crises, looked at him with dread. "Whatever she's going to say," she murmured, "I think it's going to change everything." As Dylan prepared to face them, her hand shook, not from fear of punishment, but from the unbearable anticipation of being seen for what she had done. Will stood beside her, steady, compassionate, his presence a reminder that even in guilt, one could be worthy of grace. Electra held her hand, whispering that truth, no matter how painful, was the only way to find peace. When Finn and Steffi arrived, the world seemed to still. Dylan tried to speak, but words failed. Tears blurred her vision. Finally, she managed a whisper, not an excuse, not an explanation, just the truth. "It was me," she said. "I was the one driving that night." The silence that followed was unbearable. Finn's expression froze, a mix of disbelief and fury warring with the empathy he couldn't quite suppress. Steffi's hand tightened around his arm as if grounding him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dylan fell to her knees, sobbing, apologizing again and again, her voice breaking into incoherence. "I didn't mean to, I swear I didn't mean to." Finn closed his eyes, trying to process the impossible, the person before him, broken and remorseful, against the image of Luna's laughter, forever gone. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, trembling. "You took her from us," he said. "But if you run from this truth, you'll never bring her peace." Dylan nodded, tears streaming down her face. "That's why I'm here," she whispered. "To stop running." Her confession didn't erase the pain, but it began something else, a process of reckoning that the entire family would have to face. News of her confession spread quickly, reaching the Forrester offices just as Ridge was finalizing his PR contracts. Brooke tried to control the narrative, spinning it as an unfortunate tragedy, but Katie saw through it. This wasn't just another crisis to be managed. It was a reminder that every decision, every cover-up, came with a moral cost. Bill, ever the strategist, saw opportunity even in tragedy. As Forrester's reputation wavered, he began quietly recruiting designers, executives, anyone disillusioned by Ridge's authority. He told himself it was just business, but deep down he knew it was more. He wanted to protect Katie from the same dismissiveness that had pushed her out. When he offered her a position as Spencer's head of communications, she hesitated. She knew working for Bill again meant stepping back into the eye of the storm. But when Ridge and Brooke continued to treat her as an afterthought, she made her choice. "Maybe it's time," she told Bill. "Not to go back, but to move forward." As December deepened, Los Angeles became a city divided between guilt and ambition. Dylan prepared for the legal consequences of her confession, supported quietly by Will and Electra. Finn, though devastated, found solace in her honesty. He realized that vengeance would not bring Luna back. Only truth could give meaning to her loss. Steffi, ever the pragmatist, took control of the family's emotional fallout, reminding everyone that compassion was not weakness. Ridge, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning. His obsession with control had blinded him to the emotional cost his decisions carried. And Brooke, watching Katie thrive under Bill's renewed leadership, began to wonder if she had misjudged her sister's strength all along. In the end, the lines between families blurred once more. The Forrestos and Spencers, bound by rivalry, love, and tragedy, found themselves united by a single truth: power means nothing without redemption. On the final night of the year, as the city glittered with celebration, Bill stood beside Katie at the balcony of Spencer Tower, watching fireworks bloom across the sky. Below them, Will, Electra, and Dylan gathered with Finn and Steffi at the cliffs, lighting lanterns for Luna, fragile orbs of light rising into the darkness, carrying both sorrow and forgiveness into the new year. And for the first time in a long time, Los Angeles felt quiet, not with peace, but with acceptance. The kind that comes after storms, when every heart knows that survival is not about victory, but about the courage to face what remains.